I've never said it this way, Carey. This is, I think what's at stake is if we persist in this, the embodied presence of Jesus in the world diminishes. And what the world desperately needs is the embodied presence of Jesus through Jesus followers. To live in this way is not to be consistent with Jesus. And like I said, you can be a Christian in name or trust in Christ and be not on the narrow path. What's ultimately at stake is we are compromising the very essence of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and what it means to bear witness to his presence in the world. And that has all kinds of implications around younger folks who want to come to church or not and be followers of Jesus. Has all kinds of implications for the ways that the teachings of Christianity, especially as embodied in Jesus, are reflected in our social world. To what degree are people coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus and having the world impacted around them? I think everything is at stake.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you're joining us. Hey, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. And today on the podcast, we've got Rich Villodas. We're going to talk about a lot of things, including how to know when your soul is in danger. And today's episode is brought to you by GLOO+. Do you know that GLOO+ is your new all-in-one solution? It's going to revolutionize your ministry. You get free text messaging, sermon kits, outreach tools, and discounted church products. And you're going to save thousands of dollars and countless hours. Check it out at gloo.us/plus. And now use the code CAREY20 to save 20% off. And discipling the next generation doesn't need to be confusing or cost you a ton of money. 10x10's resource library provides you with access to high-quality resources that are created and curated by youth ministry experts. And many of them are offered to you free of charge. Visit 10by10.org today to learn more. And now, my conversation with Rich Villodas. Rich, really good to have you back.
So good to be back with you, Carey.
Yeah, love hanging out, whether it's in person or this way. And thanks for being back on the show. So, this is not a shallow end question, but I think you and I are both concerned that moral integrity and Christian virtue are seemingly in shorter supply than ever. And so I guess my question is it actually getting worse? Or are we getting better at outing it? Or do you have any sense of what's going on right now in our culture?
Well, I do think there is a phenomenon called social media, that in this social media age, an age where people have the ability to raise their voice like never before, there is a newfound sense of, I think, exposing wrongdoing. And so social media also is very communal in that it creates an environment where speaking up against wrongdoing can be done in a way that garners support from others. You feel like you're not alone in this here. And so I think that's one thing. I also think that there have been significant shifts in culture related to what is permissible and what is to be rejected altogether. And so misogyny, for example, was probably accepted in previous generations. That's not accepted today, or racism, or kind of stereotyping others. Particular brands of that kind of behavior was accepted in one generation and has changed in another. And so it seems that when you combine cultural shifts as it relates to social ethics and new social norms, plus the access people have to bring awareness to the lack of moral integrity, what we find is more news around moral failure. And so is it getting worse? I don't know. I do know that failure, lack of integrity, sin has been part of the human condition since the very beginning. And so I think this is a human problem, not a generational problem. But I do think because of the changes in culture, we're probably hearing more news about it.
Yeah. And so I think, for a lot of leaders, it means we want to make sure we don't become one of those headlines, right? I don't have any desire. First of all, I don't have any desire to hurt people. I don't have any desire to betray people or do things that, would bring my leadership into question. So I guess a personal question for you is, I have personal habits, rhythms, and disciplines that I try to follow to make sure that I, stay on the path that I feel like I'm called to stay on. What are your personal habits, rhythms, or disciplines are you embracing that protect or help grow your integrity?
Yeah, I feel the same. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning saying, I want to hurt people, harm people, destroy my family, hurt the Christian movement. Um, and so, I mean, I would like to believe that my personal integrity emerges from a theological conviction that I am just as susceptible to living without integrity as the next person. I might
Mm.
not be one step away from it, but I'm a series of steps away, often insidious steps away from not living with integrity. And so I try to hold that inside. You know, my predecessor, many of you know, Pete Scazzaro.
Mm.
I mean, he once told me as I was beginning to write books, the first conversation he had with me about I asked him for some tips about publishing. And the first thing he said was, now that you're entering into the world of publishing, I want to let you know your soul is in danger like never before.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, that's not the kind of advice I was hoping for, Pete, you know? And so I have been, he kind of put the fear of God in me, like, you're going to now enter into new spaces of temptation and challenge and things that are going to potentially draw you away from your center. And so I think, what are my habits? I think I try to live with a habit that my soul is in danger on a regular basis. In terms of some practical habits beyond just that kind of, theological sense in my soul that I hold, I think I can name a few. And so for me, cultivating a healthy connection, first of all, with Rosie, my wife, is really important. I just think from a leader who happens to be married, I know lots of leaders are not married, but for those who are married, cultivating healthy connection with Rosie is really important. So naming my hopes, my preferences, maintaining clear expectations with each other. I mean, Rosie and I have a monthly meeting regarding our calendar and finances that it's the two hardest meetings of the month for us. But we try to live with integrity with one another in terms of our values, in terms of what's important to us. And so me connecting with Rosie, I think, on a regular basis is really important. I also have 3 pastor friends that I've been meeting with for 6 years, or almost 7 years now, monthly, for 90 minutes. And in that space, we are talking about, how's our soul? How's our relationships? What are we learning? What do we need feedback on? Where do we find ourselves stuck? And having a monthly rhythm of that, and then an annual retreat. Actually, my retreat is set up pretty soon. Actually, next week, I'll be going on a retreat at the time of this recording. To spend a few days with these guys. Healthy board culture, as I think important to protect. I need a lot of relationships around me, Carey, to help protect my integrity. I'm not on an island, and so whether it's friends, my marriage, a healthy board culture, seasons of therapy that I receive, and then lastly, I just say, I think we've tried to honor just a healthy rhythm, a weekly Sabbath. It's interesting in the Jewish tradition, they would say that the 4th commandment, you shall remember the Sabbath, is the most important because lots of things get violated when we're tired. And we are far more vulnerable when we're tired to maybe murder somebody or have a lack of fidelity in a particular area of our lives, or we might lie or cheat or whatever it might be when we're really tired. And so I think those are some of the ways that I've tried to rhythms and relationships around me to protect my integrity by the grace of God.
There's a few follow-ups I'd love to take on that. So you have entered the world of publishing. We'll be talking about your new book in a little bit. How have you guarded your soul? I mean, the public rankings, how your book is doing on Amazon, reviews, social media feedback, as you already pointed out. We live in an age where everybody's got an opinion, whether it's well-formed or not, and they're happy to share it. So easy to get caught up in the numbers game. You're a podcaster as well. So what steps, like, Pete's prophetic words to you, what are you doing to make sure that your soul stays healthy when you're on a public stage like that?
Well, I would have to say, I think first of all, naming the reality that the temptations that are before me are very real. When I first wrote The Deeply Formed Life, I went back to a journal entry. It was September 19th. September 14th, 2020. One day before The Deeply Formed Life was going to be published and go out publicly. And I wrote in my journal, Lord, if you want this book to bless many, many thousands, may I be open to that. And if this book is just going to bless a couple of thousand or a couple of hundred, may you be pleased with that, and may I be content with that. And then the next day, I'm looking at my Amazon rankings, like, how am I doing? Am I doing all right here?
Yeah.
Refreshing, every 30 minutes to see, am I climbing here? What's this algorithm about? And every time a book has come out, that's in me, like the temptation. So I do know, I think that's a very natural, normal way of, I want to do well. I think the problem becomes when I can't step away from that whatsoever.
Yeah.
When my entire identity is now built upon how I'm doing. Sales, numbers, metrics, and I've experienced this as a pastor.
Yeah.
Who's
church
coming?
Attendance.
Church attendance. So it took me from a pastoral perspective in terms of attendance. After I got to New Life in 2008 as a small groups pastor. When I became the lead pastor in 2013, it took me about 3 years after becoming the lead pastor to stop focusing on attendance, or at least who's coming, how come people are not coming earlier, why isn't the building more filled by this time here? It took me about 3 years of wrestling with my own shame and all of that stuff there. And so I think part of it is I have tried to have relationships around me, friends, professional help, to help me navigate this on a regular basis. And I'm not sure if there's any other way around it.
Yeah, because, if you're driven enough to write a book, if you're driven enough to get up there and write a sermon and you feel called to it, nobody wants to do that, really, let's be honest, for an audience of one. We'd rather have an audience of 2 or 2,000 or 2 million or whatever. And I wonder if it is, in the words of Andy Stanley, attention to be managed, not a problem to be solved, right?
Yeah.
Awareness is half the battle. I think I don't know that there's an answer to this question, but I think I might like to ask it anyway. You mentioned if it becomes obsessive, and I definitely have had seasons where it's been obsessive for me to track the numbers. Yeah. What for you makes it obsessive? Are there indicators? Is there a line you cross where you're like, all right, now this isn't healthy anymore?
I think part of it, the hope in this, and this is back to the integrity piece, Carey. I mean, my hope is that I'm paying attention to my own soul and lifting that up to God. Yeah. In many ways, I know when I'm crossing the line. I know when I'm refreshing my phone to such a degree that I realize I'm not in a good place right now. Because in addition to that, marking my own jealousy. When others are doing, my inability to platform people, showcase others because of a fear of kind of like a zero-sum game. If I platform and shout out somebody here, that's going to take away from me. And all the ways that I tend to be jealous and stingy with that stuff lives inside of me. And so I think I have to contend with my own sense of inadequacy, my own jealousy, my own identity. And that's something that I think this is like almost a daily crucifixion that I'm bringing to God. So again, I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I've ever gotten to a place where I'm like, whoa, okay, it feels so good to be free from that. Wasn't that a great struggle 10 years ago? And how when folks, some pastors give testimonies, it's always like something that happened 10 years ago that they never had to battle with again. I'm like, no, this is a daily reality for me in the spaces that I inhabit.
Well, that's an honest confession, and one that is shared, I'm sure, by many people listening and myself. I'm always questioning my motives because unchecked, they go in the wrong direction, Rich. They just do. Yeah. They just naturally, I do not naturally gravitate toward health. I just don't. Want to talk a little bit about your meeting with Rosie. I think, first of all, congratulations for you to do a monthly calendar and budgeting meeting. That's better than many couples. And I think one of the reasons it doesn't happen a lot of the time is because those tend not to be positive meetings. You said it's sometimes the most stressful meeting of the month. Can you give us a little window into that? Like, why are you doing them? And then what's that dynamic like? And any tips for those of us who probably should be doing that a little more often?
Well, the calendar meeting in particular emerges out of lots of frustration and missing values that Rosie has and I have. And so Rosie values that we have planned family time, planned vacation time, that we have well-planned vacations in a given year. Now, I grew up in a family that didn't take many vacations. And so for me, that's like, why do we need to go on another vacation? For Rosie, she grew up with a rhythm of vacations that's important to her. And so I think that's number one. Number two, I think us not meeting and getting on the same page in terms of how our time was going to be budgeted in a given week or a given month just led to lots of surprise meetings. Hey, oh, honey, by the way, tomorrow I have a meeting with the board, or tomorrow I have a meeting with this person. And she's like, 1 day notice is not really doing it. And so I think we saw so much tension in our own communication in marriage that we realized we better think way down the line here for the sake of our own life together. And so that's what it emerged out of. It emerged out of our own frustration and us missing each other. In terms of what we do, we take the long view. We're looking at big picture, a given year. So we'll plan out a given year in terms of my speaking engagements are usually a year out. So I say yes to about 12 to 15 engagements a year. They're usually a year out. And so we know what we're doing there. We have a sense as to holiday rhythms and school rhythms. So we're putting in, where do we want to spend time with as a family together intentionally? So we build that 1 year. So that one meeting happens probably annual or twice a year. And then on a monthly basis, what we're looking at is every week for that month. Yeah. And then we have a weekly meeting, short check-in on Sundays, where I actually fill out a chart that we have in pencil that we post by the refrigerator, so that we're all super clear in terms of what we can expect for that given week. And it's painful, Carey. On my end, it's like painful. It's like I want my life to be about me and whatever I want to do. I want to do. But I realize to be married is to have a different kind of spirituality than a single person in that way. And so I am married. This is my first calling. But I think that has led to a lot more joy and peace and shared expectations in our home.
How do you handle the financial meeting? Dave Ramsey has a lot of advice, so do others, but are there any great practices that you and Rosie have that you could recommend to others, or things to avoid?
Yeah. Well, generally, and I've talked about this before. Rosie and I, early in our marriage, and I've preached about this, we made some really bad decisions as a young couple and got into some significant debt, and really had to reorder our lives in some really significant ways in order to dig out of the hole and find ourselves in a better place. In terms of what it looks like in our home, we have all these flip charts. So we're a flip chart family here. And we'll put out these flip charts, and we're naming our hopes, our priorities, our necessities. So we have it all listed out here. What are we hoping to do? What must we prioritize? What we can't say no to? And so number one, we're just getting a big picture perspective on what are the financial implications for a given year or a given quarter or a given month. And then in our monthly meeting, we're just big picture. Rosie's the one who's doing the kind of the day-to-day, week-to-week finances in our home. But I'm brought in because, again, there were plenty of times where a financial decision's made, and because I wasn't involved, I come back and go, hey, why do we do this? Or how come we can't do that? And she's saying, well, we haven't been on the same page having conversation around this. And then she feels judged by me because I'm asking questions about something that I'm not involving myself in whatsoever. And so we realized, for the sake of our health of our marriage, we need to meet. And so we're looking at cash flow. We're looking at priorities, birthdays, hosting. We were doing hosting, people having over our home. So we're getting in the nitty gritty of that. And we're doing that once a month for about hour and a half. And there are times where it's joy, and most of the time it's pain, because we're not just talking about money, we're talking about values. Yeah. We're talking about things that are, and there are many times where what I value is not what she values, and vice versa. And so how do we come to a place of compromise and negotiating our differences well? That's the hard stuff. And but I'm so glad that we're doing it. It's really helped our relationship.
Sounds like most marriages, to be honest. It really does.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it does. And marriage is a different spirituality. That's a very good framing of it. You mentioned healthy board relationships. So on the one hand, you have a board that's just got your friends on it who let whatever happen, happen. On the other hand, you've got a board that's micromanaging you and there's no trust and you can't get anything done. What do healthy board relationships and dynamics look like for you, Rich?
You know, we in the last 5-6 years, I think we hit something on our board in terms of some important principles about a really healthy culture. Now, I think for New Life's history for 37 years, I think we've had really strong boards. I think we've had healthy boards. But I think something happened in the last 5 years in terms of in my tenure, me stepping in. The founding pastor and the board is going to have a different relationship than the person who succeeds the founding pastor, and then is related to the board. And so my dynamics with the board is different from Pete's dynamics with the board.
Right.
So a couple of things that we discovered along the way. Number one, it's so that the relationship I have to each board member is critically important. So prioritizing connection one-on-one is really important. And so on a monthly basis, I check in. I have a 1 hour to 90-minute conversation with one board member one time a month. And the goal of that is twofold. Number one, just checking in relationally. But number two, it's about maintaining integrity. So we have these 5 values that I write about in The Deeply Formed Life. And every month I'm having a conversation with the one board member on one of those values, because at the start of each board meeting, the second Wednesday of each month, one of our board members is going to share the ways that they're wrestling with this particular value. And so what that's done for us is it's helped our board members to see they're just not on the board because they're savvy in finances, or they have good business acumen, or they're great in legal services. They're there because we want to model something as a community of board members before the church. And so that has been a significant shift, I think, in the life of our church. Moreover, every year we have done like a book together to help board dynamics and wrestling through various issues that we are trying to discern God's will on. But also, I have a monthly report that I send to the board that's naming a very clear template in terms of what's going on in my life, various facets of my life, areas that they can speak into, questions that they can name. And so every month I'm reporting to the board, naming the tensions, the complexities, the challenges with my own life, my family. Am I giving myself too much to the outside? So there's just a normal open space to have some of these conversations on a regular basis. And as a matter of fact, whenever I invite a board member on, or whenever in our model, our congregation nominates candidates and then they go through a process, whenever I'm meeting with one of the board members, one of the things I'm saying is, can you ask me hard questions? Are you able to stand your ground and offer a perspective that might be different than mine? And I ask these questions because I know what it's like to have just board members who are just going to say yes to everything. At the same time, there must be such an alignment of values, Carey, that if a board member, and we've had this as well, where this is a value that we believe in, but the board member might not necessarily be fully aligned. And now we're in trouble in terms of tension. So I preach something and they go, why are we preaching that? And so that's the dance here. And we haven't always done it perfectly, but I think we've done it really well over almost 4 decades.
How big is your board? How many members?
It varies. So it's usually anywhere between, I'd say, 7 to 9 people. And I'm included in that.
Great. So it is scalable in the sense that you can do that hour to 90 minutes with a board meeting, a board member once a month. I was just thinking if you've got a big board, things start to get difficult quickly with that.
Yes, exactly right. In my case, yes, correct. In this setting here, it's manageable to have that annual connection in that way. I'm connecting with them in other spaces, but that one-to-one is really important.
So I went to our podcast listeners on social and got some questions, and I picked a few of them that I want to give to you. You know, you are really focused on creating and anchoring yourself into a deeply formed life, I should say. How do you slow down in a world that seems to be just getting faster?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to clarify what I mean when I say slow, because by slowing down, I'm not talking about not being productive, not getting things done. To slow down doesn't mean I have to lessen my capacity or my desire to get things done. And I say that because I think if we're not careful, slow can become another way idolatry surfaces in our lives, where it's about being slow as an end. I
took
no
5
longer
Sabbaths this week.
You get one per week, man.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for me, by slowing down, what I'm getting at is a kind of pace that makes me more attentive to God, more attentive to myself, and more attentive to my neighbor, whether it be my first neighbors, my family, or the neighbor, whoever I might be next to in a given moment. And so for me, that's what slowing down is. And at the core of this, I think, is a theology of limits. It's a recognition that I can't do all the things I want to do. I have a limit in my capacity, limit in energy, limit in intellect, limit in finances. And so for me, practically slowing down, and we've already alluded to it briefly, it's a weekly Sabbath for me. It's many Sabbaths in a given day. So a mini Sabbath for me is like a 10 to 15 minute moment in a given day where I'm slowing down to pray, to reflect, to journal. For me, and this is a kind of crucifixion, Carey. I just want to tell you, I don't have a particular grace on my life because I write about this stuff that I'm able to do it far easier than anyone else. I think the fact that I write about this stuff makes it even harder for me to do it because I recognize everything inside me wants to do something else. And so it's a little crucifixion every day for me. And so it's really hard for me to slow down. But the Sabbath, something very practical, slowing down as a family, the time that we eat together as a family. I forget the stat. I have to look it up. It said from the 1990s to like today, the amount of time for a meal has gone down so much. So it might have been like 30 minutes of where people actually sat down and had a conversation with their family. And it is maybe down half or something along those lines where people are scarfing down their food and then they're up again. So what we try to do, even on almost a week, daily basis, is what does it look like for us to have a meal together as a family, or if we're with friends, and not get up from the table really quickly? What does it look like to have good conversation and to be inquisitive about each other's lives? And so that's, for me, one of the ways that I'm trying to slow down my life.
Okay, other listeners listener submitted questions. That's the phrase I'm looking for. How do you balance spiritual health and performance issues with staff? In other words, you want to be their spiritual advisor, but you got a slacker there who's not really producing much, or somebody who's not the right fit. How do you coach somebody in a spiritually healthy way when their performance isn't up to snuff?
I mean, the way we've done it over these years is the language I've used is we are always holding together soul and role. And so we want to see you growing in your own formation at the same time, especially staff workers. You've been hired to do a certain job with particular goals and priorities set. And so this is a matter of good stewardship. People are giving their money and to support the work that we're doing on a staff level. And so for me, this is how are we managing and stewarding what we've received? Practically, I think clarifying expectations on a regular basis has been one of the most important things that we've done. And if I can use kind of just good, emotionally healthy relationships language, an expectation is only valid when 4 things happen: when it is conscious, when it is spoken, when it is realistic, and when it is agreed upon. That's what makes an expectation valid: conscious, spoken, realistic, agreed upon. When a staff person comes on, they have a very clear job description. When I meet with our staff, for high level staff, I have annually a set of priorities, hopes, goals that I'm hoping this particular area of our church is going to move towards. And then we have a conversation of, to what degree are we collaborating? To what degree are they adding whatever priorities they think is important in this area? And then we agree to say, okay, we are agreeing together. Now we have a shared expectation. Now, in the event that doesn't happen, or there's significant underperformance in that area, then we have to have an honest conversation about fit, about the person's ability to stay in this role. But it requires us to speak very honestly, to clarify expectations on a regular basis. We have never been at New Life of the, or maybe Pete might say different. Pete had his own personal revolution in this, but we want to care for the soul and their development, and at the same time, have them coach them up so that the role that they're in, that they're bearing fruit in the ways that they're working. And so clarifying expectations for us on a regular basis, I think, has been really important to hold that together.
So this question comes from a podcast listener and guest. James Poulter wants to know, he's big into AI and a parent. What does the deeply formed life look like for kids in a smartphone era?
Yeah.
You got kids?
I have a 15-year-old and almost a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So a deeply formed life, for me, it's my way of talking about a deep spiritual formation. This is Galatians 4, where Paul says, I'm in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. And so to just frame that, I'm thinking about the life of Christ being formed in an adult, in a child, a teenager. I think the smartphone makes it very easy for adults and children to be malformed. And so the essence of this technology actually promotes a skimming, scrolling, surface way of being. The very essence of its user experience is skimming, scrolling, surface. And so that malforms us in some significant ways. In addition to that, specifically social media, I think presents before us a temptation to be like God and God's attributes around omnipresence, trying to be everywhere at the same time and not being where we're at. Omniscience, trying to know everything. And omnipotence, trying to use our presence, our words as a means of power. And so I think this is very real for adults and for children. And so what's required? I do think a spirituality of fasting is required. I think fasting food was, and still has some significant spiritual benefits. I wonder if the fasting of technology needs to not necessarily replace, but almost be on par with food, because of the intrusive nature of technology. And so to fast is to say no, to give a greater yes to something or someone else. In terms of children, I guess it depends how old the child is. So that's number one. I think some children might be a bit more precocious and might be able to. I know Jonathan Haidt has written a bunch already about, when kids should get smartphones and when they should get social media. And his take is, 14 and 16, when they should get that, which I think there's some good data around that. I think kids need, what's a deeply formed life? Kids need clear boundaries. Kids need us to be involved in their formation. What is it doing to you? To what degree? How are you interacting? When our daughter got her first phone, or her phone, there was actually, it might have been Cara Powell. I think I heard from Cara, where there was like this smartphone checklist or like agreement that we were going to. Yeah, and so we met around that, and we've had to pull that thing out a few times to say, now remember,
here's the contract.
This is the contract. This is what we agreed to. This is what we are agreeing to. And so I recommend Cara's resource on that for parents who are trying to discern how to disciple their children or appropriately guard their lives from being swallowed up in the abyss of social media and the smartphone. But I think those clear boundaries and that parent contract, I think, is one way to start.
We're doing a whole series on this, so feel free to give us the thumbnail version. But we're heading into an election year, so much division. Yeah. You're in New York. You have so many nations, people groups, perspectives represented at your church. What's your approach or strategy heading into the fall of 2024?
Yeah, my approach and strategy is to do what I did in 2020. In 2016, I made a big mistake. I assumed that people would vote in particular ways, and because of that assumption, I unwittingly hurt and alienated people because I did not have the full grasp of diversity within my congregation, and so I hurt a lot of people in 2016, alienated some folks. 2020. I did it differently. And so New Life is very diverse, 75 nations represented, 123 languages spoken, diverse across the board politically, generationally, socioeconomically. My hope, first of all, is that I would preach and foster a culture that has a social imagination that's shaped by Jesus and the way of his kingdom. In 2020, I gave a series of 5 messages on politics. I'm not going to do 5. I'll probably do 2 this year. And at the beginning of every sermon, I said 3 things. I said, if you vote for Donald Trump, you're welcome to come to our church. If you vote for Joe Biden, you're welcome to come to our church. I just hope and pray that you would see your politics through Jesus and not Jesus through your politics. My hope is, number 2, that you would be curious as to why members of our community see the world differently than you do. And number 3, that you would be prayerfully humble as we are in conversations with one another. And so I think more than anything, I'm trying to shape the interpersonal culture of how we relate to one another that does not reflect the world around us. And then for me, as a pastor, my primary job is to grow in my own level of self-differentiation. We've talked about it before, my ability to remain close to God, close to myself, and close to others in times of high anxiety and reactivity. And so what's my approach? I need to take care of my own soul first and lead from a place of calm presence and not reactivity.
As much as you're comfortable sharing, and I imagine it's on the public record if we want to dig back, what was your mistake looking back on it that you made in 2016?
If I can be frank, Carey, I mean, I had a hard time believing that folks in our community would vote for Donald Trump. And for various character reasons. And because of that, I had a major blind spot around the level of the impact that to critique a political figure or a political party often critiques people at a deep center. And so my mistake was on social media. I think I said things about Donald Trump that things along the lines of, like, if you support this guy, there's something wrong with you, something along to the effect of that there. Might have come out as blatant as that, but it was along those lines there. And I realized, because I started having a lot of conversations with people in my community, I would say 30% of our church voted for Donald Trump. And so that's a big swath of people with that in New Life Fellowship, 1,500 people, that's 500 people there that voted for a particular candidate. And I just realized I was not as curious, and I unwittingly alienated people because of that there. And so that doesn't mean I still don't have strong convictions about what I think it means to follow Jesus and how the world should be ordered in the name of Jesus. But I think I'm doing so recognizing people are at very different points in their spiritual journeys and why they see the world in the way that they do. And what does discipleship look like now as opposed to alienation? And I think that's what I did in that season.
So you got a new book called The Narrow Path, and I was excited to get my hands on a copy of it. You argue a lot of Christians are actually on the broad path. So can you just define terms? I think most people have an idea of what you're talking about, but why would you say most Christians are actually on the broad path?
Yeah, the narrow path, very simply, is it's the way of following the countercultural way of Jesus as reflected in the Sermon on the Mount. So the narrow path is a book really focusing on the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says there's a broad path and there's a narrow path. What's interesting is I contend that when Jesus talks about the narrow path and the broad path, he's not simply, or maybe even primarily within that context, talking about the afterlife. Mm-hmm. Lots of Christians believe, oh, he's talking about the afterlife, which means not a lot of people are going to be in heaven. The broad path is going to be filled with lots of sinners in there. It's because hell is going to be filled with lots of sinners. I'm not sure Jesus, the emphasis, the accent of his teachings has to do with the afterlife so much as he's referring to life here and right now, the kingdom of God here and right now. And so the narrow path is the subversive, undermining way of Jesus that undermines the ways of common culture and cultural norms. The broad path is just the way that everyone takes. And my summation of that is, I think what Jesus is doing is three things in the Sermon on the Mount, and identifying the broad path by a sense of moralism, successism, and individualism. And very simply, moralism is the way I'm presenting it, a way of focusing on the externals to such a degree that the internals are not taken. There's no inventory on the internals. And so Jesus has to say on a regular basis, you've heard it said, but I tell you. You've heard it said, you shall not commit murder. But I tell you, there's something deeper that God wants to do in your life. Successism is our way of determining what a good life looks like, what a successful life looks like. And I think what the broad way has a particular way of seeing success, what a good life is. And I think Jesus, even in the start of the Sermon on the Mount with his Beatitudes, is saying a good life, a blessed life, a happy life looks a lot different in the kingdom of God than it does in the kingdom of the world. And so the broad way is the common ways that we tend to define what a good life, a successful life looks like. And then individualism, for me, the way I'm presenting it is the broad way is disconnecting our spirituality from our neighbor, our disconnecting our relationship with God to our relationship with neighbor. And that sounds so like Christian 101. And yet, I think what Jesus is saying is any spirituality that does not hold together in the deepest of ways, love for God and love for neighbor, is not a spirituality of the narrow path. That is the broad path. And so ultimately, I'm trying to underscore what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount in a few of those ways.
So moralism, successism, and individualism?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, when you really start to break it down and you look at the Sermon on the Mount through different lenses, it's pretty clear we get caught. And it's funny, just before we go there, let me back up a little bit. When you were describing how we traditionally think about the broad versus the narrow path, brought me back to this artwork I haven't thought of in years. I'm sure it was in some kid's Bible I got. And it was like this narrow path with people walking down it, this broad path, and it's just packed and people are like falling off into the flames of hell and all that stuff. Do not share this with your children, please, in the future moving forward.
Not before bed either.
Not a good image. But anyway, it's sort of that idea that, oh yeah, once you've accepted Christ, you're on the narrow path. But you're saying, and I agree with you, this isn't soteriological. It's more along the lines of, well, Calvin talked about the third and principal use of the law, which is a guide to the redeemed. It's basically, this is a guide for living. Is that right? It's not salvation based. It's more how we work at. It's sanctification based.
Yeah, sanctification, theology, spiritual formation, discipleship, spiritual formation.
Yeah.
It's this might sound scandalous to say, Carey, but there are lots of Christians that are not on the narrow path, because everything that Jesus has talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, it is very easy to say, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, and not be living in the way that Christ has called us to. And so, again, I'm not talking soteriological language here. I'm talking about discipleship language. Of course, that has impact into eternity, but the accent. And so it is a guide. Now, what's fascinating, though, is the way that folks have typically interpreted the Sermon on the Mount is through a lens of this is what can't be done. Therefore, the emphasis is on trusting God for forgiveness. And so the language is, it's rooted in the Sermon on the Mount is idealism, and we cannot live this reality. And so it's like, instead of you can't live this out, so trust God. The emphasis I am placing is trust God, so that by God's grace we can live this out. Where the emphasis is not on Jesus saying, if you get around to it, that whole loving your enemy thing there, that whole relationship to money, that whole relationship to anger. If you can't do it, don't worry about it. Just trust me and I will forgive you. I'm saying that's not the accent. The accent is we are called to model a whole different way of being in the world. But it begins by trusting in God's grace and in God's forgiveness and his empowerment in order to do that. So for me, it's a question about accent. Is this to be lived, or is this to confront the ways we can't live it so that we can just receive God's forgiveness? And I think it's the former rather than the latter.
So you categorize the Sermon on the Mount into a number of categories, and I want to just list them, and then I'll let you pick a few and just sort of comment on what you see behind all of them. So you've got anger, words, desires, money, anxiety, judgments, decisions, and enemies. So pick one. Let's go with anger, because that seems to be a characteristic of the Christian life these days. It's like, if you're not outraged, you're not following, Christ. There's so much outrage out there on a variety of things. What's your take on that, on anger?
It's interesting. Jesus, he begins by saying, you've heard it said, but I say unto you. And so when Jesus says, you have heard it said, don't murder, but I tell you, don't be angry. That the anger that Jesus is talking about there is not a momentary kind of emotional moment. That's what it means to be human. I think we're all going to get angry around a number of things. The word that Jesus uses there, Dale Bruner, New Testament scholar, said that word is orgazomenos in Greek, which is this ongoing nurturing of anger. It's like you're feeding it, you're giving it life, you're nurturing it, you're coddling anger to such a degree where he says, if you tell a brother or sister, raka, R-A-C-A. Now, we don't use that in our day today, but that's like, think about the most, a word with such contempt that you have for someone else. And there's lots of raka going on in our world, but he's saying the ways that we nurture anger and feed it is inconsistent with life in the kingdom of God. And so how must we now deal with that anger and the world around us? As you said, Carey, I mean, people build platforms on nurturing anger. People build brands on it. Social media. Radio across the board. And all of that, Jesus is saying, is inconsistent with the way of the kingdom.
So what do you do? I mean, I'm trying very hard. The joke inside my little company is we're trying to create a place for the good people on the internet where we treat each other with respect and civility, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do if you find yourself preaching against things, being against? Sort of what Jeff Henderson says, right? We want to be known by what we're for, not by what we're against, but often it's the opposite. How do you break that pattern, that cycle, that addiction to outrage?
I think so much of the outrage we feel many times is rooted in fear that lives deep within us, untended to fear. And so the outrage of this group of people are taking over. I mean, if you were to peel back that onion a little bit, there is a level of a fear, a level of blind spots that we carry. And so I think first of all, it requires us to grow in kind of living in awareness about the ways we have been formed by our surrounding culture. Every day we're being formed in one way or another. And I think the honest Christian, the honest follower of Jesus would take inventory on a regular basis to say, to what degree is my life modeling what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount? To what degree is my life modeling what Paul is saying in the fruit of the Spirit? I think we need on a regular basis this frameworks and language to help us put our life against, to say, this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And I tell you what, I contend, Carey, that the Sermon on the Mount is the most important set of teachings in the Bible as it relates to faithfulness to Jesus. And if that is true, relatively speaking, it might be the most under preached, under contemplated set of teachings in the entire Bible,
and misapplied.
And misapplied, 100%, 100%. And so I think part of it begins with our own interior examination, which when you're really angry and outraged, it's often very difficult, which is why back to community, back to friendships, we started out by saying, how do you protect your own soul and your own integrity? I need a lot of relationships around me to do that. And spiritual director, friends, Rosie, mentors, elders, I need a lot around me to help me from going down a particular road.
It's interesting, I hadn't thought about this before, but when I think about that circle around me, outrage people don't last long in my circle. If somebody's driven by outrage, they're always upset about this. They're always upset about that. They're going on a rant about this. That's really interesting. I didn't think about how community shapes that. On the other hand, if every text message you're getting is somebody who's upset about something, you're going to get outraged too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the tension that we're holding is, how do we name the particular injustices of the world, the particular pain points in the world, the particular ways that people are suffering in the world in a way that is animated, not simply by a kind of outrage, but fueled by compassion, fueled by love, where the very nature of the ways we are trying to address something has a different tenor to it. And I think ultimately that's what's going to last. The love that we have socially, individually, that's what ultimately is going to last.
Well, you argue that, the Sermon on the Mount is probably the most important teaching of Jesus we have. It also explains him the best. If you want to, open the kimono, so to speak, and have a look at what is fueling Jesus, like what are the principles, the values, that's what you'll discover. And that's what made him so countercultural. Yeah. Anything else on the list? I've got a couple that I would go to, but any favorite of yours that you want to unpack?
I'll briefly mention too, so money, Jesus, interestingly enough, says that money is not a neutral tool, but a rival God. Yeah. And it's very, it's usually, the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's true, that's in there. But it can almost make it seem as if money is just this neutral thing, just waiting to be used for good or for bad. And I think the way Jesus described mammon, money, is like, this is like a power and principality. It's seductive. It's a rival God. And I think we would do well to begin to see money not just as this neutral thing, but as actually a seductive power. I think that's what Jesus is helping us with. And then anxiety, Jesus talks about excessive worry that we carry. And I think in Jesus naming our excessive worry that we all feel as human beings, what he does first and foremost is he's trying to help us get a better view of who God is. A.W. Tozer has that famous line that says, what comes to our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Jesus has come to heal the false images of God that we carry in our minds that often contribute to the kind of worry and anxiety that we carry deep down in our souls. And so Jesus has given, Brennan Manning once said, the primary revelation of Jesus is presenting God as Abba. And I think as we begin to see God from a different perspective, our images of God healed in our own minds, I think that can begin the process of rooting out the kind of excessive worry that often dominates our lives.
So to jump back to money, I'd love to spend a little more time on that. You started with a personal story saying, when you and Rosie were young, you made some decisions that led to some financial hardship for you. Money is not neutral, right? And greed, we've seen greed get a hold of a lot of people. What do you do with money? Like, what is a healthy relationship with it? Or can you have a healthy relationship with money?
Yeah, I think we do. I think it's one of those things where, how I started at the beginning saying my soul is in danger. I realize every time I get paid, every time I speak at a gathering and I get paid for it, I sign a book deal, my soul's in danger at this time. I think so. Number one, I think just naming that reality, I think is really important. Secondly, because of my own story, I did not come from a family that had means. And so I grew up actually rather on the low end of the economic spectrum. And so now that things are a little bit different than how I grew up, I have to like really contend with, okay, what does it mean now to manage this really well? So number one, Rosie and I have needed another area of help. We needed financial advisors and people to say, this is what you do. Even like, the practical wisdom of, Rich, if you sign a book deal or if you speak at an event, you better make sure that a good percentage of that is going to taxes. And you're setting that aside. Like if I didn't have that information or someone not to guide me and mentor me along those ways, I'd be in big trouble right now. And I think having another layer of protection around me in people like that is really important. And then there's just to what degree am I practicing generosity? To what degree are we trying to live within our means and not try to go above just because we have more? That doesn't mean God is calling us to spend more in a way that's irresponsible. And so back to our financial meetings that Rosie and I are having on a regular basis, we're looking at we want to be more generous. Every year we want to grow in generosity and giving away what God has given us. Every year we want to, and not just bless, give in such a way where it's going to help our taxes, giving away where we can't benefit from taxes and such. And so what does it mean to just give to people who are just in need or support people who we believe in? And so that's a ongoing conversation, literally monthly, that we're having in our home around how we're stewarding what God has entrusted to us.
What's at stake when we look at the list and if we go on being angry, use our words against people, become desirous, misuse money, high anxiety, judgmental, not loving our enemies. What's at stake for the church? Because, the research has been out there for years, going back 20 years. This is what people think Christians are. People outside the church think we are these things. So what's at stake in your mind if we don't get this right?
I think, I've never said it this way, Carey. I think what's at stake is if we persist in this, the embodied presence of Jesus in the world diminishes. And what the world desperately needs is the embodied presence of Jesus through Jesus followers. To live in this way is not to be consistent with Jesus. And like I said, you can be a Christian in name or trust in Christ and be not on the narrow path. What's ultimately at stake is we are compromising the very essence of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and what it means to bear witness to his presence in the world. And that has all kinds of implications around younger folks who want to come to church or not and be followers of Jesus. Has all kinds of implications for the ways that the teachings of Christianity, especially as embodied in Jesus, are reflected in our social world. To what degree are people coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus and having the world impacted around them? I think everything is at stake.
What have we not touched on that you think we need to or could touch on in this conversation?
I think about just changes in culture, the way discipleship might be different today than in previous years, specifically because of increasing advances in technology and what that's doing to us. The level of distraction, the level of superficiality, the impatient ways that pastors lead others. I'm very passionate, Carey, about, because of my mistakes, how do we pastor communities through big issues like politics, like sexuality, like race? How do we lead communities in some of these big issues in ways that are patient, God-honoring? That's something that comes to mind on a regular basis for me.
Yeah, you did mention technology, and under the subtext of your reply, I think I hear AI. Where do you see that going? What are your fears when you look out over the next 5 years? What do you think could happen to us?
I think we're already seeing, the level of, in one of my books, Good and Beautiful and Kind, I read about powers and principalities, Ephesians 6 language. And that feels like, oh, we're talking about demons now behind every bush. When I define powers and principalities, I'm talking about kind of nefarious forces that get caught up in individuals, ideologies, and institutions with three goals: deception, depersonalization, and division. Any powers and principality. Social media is a power and principality that, at its best, it's helping to foster good connection. Some of my best friends I've met through social media, and some good things happen there. But when it's wrapped around these negative, nefarious forces, what you find is deception, depersonalization, and division. I think at its worst, that's AI and technology generally. We're moving down a road of deceit. What is real? We're moving down a road of depersonalization, where people are no longer seen as image bearers of God. They are reduced to the things that we hate most about them. We don't see people anymore, individuals. And then there's the division that's already part of our lived experience right now that will only intensify. And so I'm not sure exactly what needs to happen from more of a policy perspective in terms of how we're governing this appropriately. But I do see that's where we are, and increasingly that's where we're headed.
Rich, this is really good. What would you say to young leaders who, you and I kind of have that pre-digital memory a little bit. We remember what it was like. They've got a million options in front of them. They have the world in front of them. What do young leaders in particular really need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, in light of all of these myriad of options and places they can go. And I understand this, to use Enneagram language, I'm an Enneagram 7. So when I'm not in my healthy place, I want to be everywhere at the same time. I want to taste every food. I want to be everywhere. So it's hard for me to be still and centered, which is why the contemplative life is so important to me, because it helps me to be more centered than where I would typically go. I remember in college, I never forgot this quote. I think it was by a Greek mathematician, Archimedes, I believe, who said, "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I'll move the world." And I really like that, because he's really talking about living from a centered place and what could happen when you get centered. And so I think for young people, I have a discernment question that I heard a number of years ago that has helped me with all of the options that are before me. And I think the question is, which path makes me most generous with my life? If you're thinking about all the myriad of options before you and you're trying to narrow it down to what should I be giving my time to? What should I be giving my energy to? What does it look like to live which path makes me most generous? I'm not just talking about financially generous. I'm talking about generous with your soul, your energy, generous with your life. And then back to a theology of limits. We can't do it all. And so what does it mean to use that potentially as a framework, a rubric, to help me make decisions that lead to me living with great joy and honoring God in the process?
Well, the book is called The Narrow Path. It's available everywhere. We will not be checking the Amazon rankings on this one, right? Right.
I might check on day one, Carey.
Just day one, only once. Yeah, no, I get it. That is such a good spirit check for me too. Gosh, I can become numbers consumed. It's not good. Where can leaders find you online these days? Where are you hanging out?
Yeah, still hanging out on Twitter, or X, where we're calling it now, and Instagram at Rich Villodas. For folks who want to learn more about various content I'm writing, like books or upcoming video courses on preaching, things along those lines, just richvillodas.com. Those are the places that I'm testing out materials or just putting stuff out.
Well, until next time, Rich, thank you so much.
Carey, always a joy to be with you.